Buenas tardes, buenas mañanas, buenos días. Estamos un poco retrasados, así que más vale que empecemos. Es mi gran placer moderar este panel e introducir a los panelistas que van a discursar.
It's a great pleasure for me to introduce the panelists who will be talking, and I would like to introduce Father Ariel Suárez Jáuregui from Cuba, and he will be our first speaker. So Father Jáuregui, and I should have all of this memorized, but I'm a bit nervous, so I forgot it. But Father Jáuregui has been a priest since the age of 26. He studied at the Gregorian University of Rome, and he has also attended seminaries in Havana. He is the Adjunct Secretary of the Archiepiscopal Conference of Cuba. He has also been appointed by the conference as the representative of the conference for interfaith affairs. There's a lot more that I could say regarding Father Ariel, but the most important thing for me is that he is a fellow citizen. During the few days that we have spent together, he has become a friend of my soul. And so we will then continue with Father Nelson Águia. Father Águia is from Brazil, from Rio de Janeiro. Excuse me. I'll need this to assist me. I had it here, but it... He studied at the second Archdiocese of Rio de Janeiro at that faculty, and also at the Benedictine Monastery of Rio de Janeiro. He's also an attorney. And he is the interfaith. He is the coordinator for the Interfaith Commission of Jurists of Brazil, and he's also the secretary for the Ecumenic Commission and Interfaith Dialogue, also from the diocese. Our third speaker will be Marcos Peckel from Argentina. Sorry, from Colombia. I knew that. He studied at the Institute of Technology of Israel. He also holds a master's degree from McGill University in Canada. He is a lecturer in international treaties at the University of Rosario and the Diplomatic Academy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Colombia. And more importantly, because that is the position in which he is coming here, he is the executive director or the CEO of the Confederation of Jewish Communities, which is an umbrella organization that includes all those other Jewish organizations. Furthermore, he is an advisor for religious affairs in Colombia, and he's also a commissioner for the Jewish Congress of Latin America. So without further ado, I will go ahead and give the word to Father Ariel.
Buenos días.
Good morning, everyone.
Primero, gracias, ¿verdad?
And first of all, I would like to thank God and the organizers of this symposium for their kindness in inviting me to learn and to share.
Yo he titulado mi presentación
I have titled my presentation
al tema
A
de
Testimonial Approach to the Topic of Religious Freedom in Cuba. And I'll begin with an introduction. I am aware of the inadequacy of these lines. My approach to this topic arises from a personal history and not from sociological or political study or from the sciences of law. I was born in Cuba in 1973,
cuando profesar de Cristo
a time during which professing the Christian faith resulted in social exclusion, discrimination, and a significant amount of suffering.
los expulsaron del trabajo
Having married in the Catholic Church, my parents were fired from their jobs in 1969. They remained faithful to God and to their religious convictions. As a result of that, they became deserving of respect and admiration, including of their detractors, so those who did not share their religious conviction.
volvieron a recuperar el empleo tiempo después.
Later, they were able to regain employment in less significant and less remunerated positions. However, they decided to remain in Cuba because of their Christian faith. My father stayed in Cuba because, and this was his literal, this was, as he said literally, if we Christians leave Cuba, then who is going to evangelize in Cuba?
Crecí pues en un hogar cristiano
And so I was born in a Christian home, but with great religious openness.
era católico práctico y mi madre
Because my father, who has since passed, he practiced the Catholic faith, and my mother, who is still alive, was a Baptist. Catholic priests and evangelical leaders came to our house. We prayed together. We read and talked about the Bible, and there were many a time when they would stay to have lunch or dinner with us. And on the appropriate days, my entire family would go to Catholic Mass or to the Baptist worship services.
dos hermanos ni a mí recibiendo
Our parents did not teach my siblings who persecuted us or made life difficult for us for practicing our faith. In our neighborhood and at school, we had classmates and friends who did not have faith in God or who did not express it publicly. In my family and in the church, I learned that people are greater and more important than their ideas, and that in interpersonal relations there is always something to be enriched from, and that everyone can change. And a powerful force of change is to find, to learn about, and to get to meet and dialogue with others. So many times when I was a child, when I was a teenager, and as a young Christian, and later on in my experience as a priest, I've heard the phrase, I didn't know that you Christians were that way. And this was typically a reference to some positive appreciation of what had previously been regarded from a perspective of bias or negative or neutral stereotype.
he cambiado mi percepción.
I too have changed my perception of many realities after I have gotten to know people.
Algunos elementos a tener en cuenta cuando
Some things that need to be kept in mind when looking at Cuba. The Cuban government defines itself as Marxists and believes that socialism is the project that it would like to develop. The Constitution that was approved in 1976 defined Cuba as an atheist state. In 1991, this was amended, and the government declared itself to be a secular state. If Cuba is compared too easily with the extinct Soviet Union or with countries in Eastern Europe toward the end of the 20th century, then you will not gain a proper understanding of Cuba. The political and social change that happened in my country on January 1st, 1959 was not caused by military pacts or by the presence of Soviet troops occupying my country. Rather, it was caused by an internal movement with its own characteristics that was deeply related to the history of the nation and with the desire for a different situation than most of people in the country desired back then. We can also affirm that the relationship between the church and the Cuban government in recent decades, although there were some aspects that were shared with those countries that are located in Eastern Europe and in the social countries of Europe, there are also some significant differences. The diplomatic relations between the Cuban state and the Holy See were never broken, and the Catholic Church in Cuba has always been independent in terms of appointing bishops and has never had to present its names to government authorities for its approval. The Pope has always been able to appoint Cuban bishops with full freely. The same can be said in terms of appointing a parish priest or moving one from one parish to another. It has always been possible to carry out, for bishops to move internally or externally, to go anywhere in the country or to travel abroad, and to have meetings with the Holy See in Rome or with other bishops anywhere in the world. The Church has been able to organize the education of its ministers and of its faithful, its educational programs and training sessions for its teachers, and it has never depended financially on the government. In the initial years of the revolutionary government, there was some friction between the government and the Catholic Church. And quite a few committed Catholics participated in the fight for a change in the system in Cuba. When the government became radicalized and declared itself to be Marxist, the Catholic bishops expressed their fear for what they knew, because of what they knew about the life of Christians in the countries in Eastern Europe. And this resulted in a crisis. Teaching was nationalized, and Catholic schools were forced to close down. This also applies to universities. All of these had more than 100,000 students, and many religious people who dedicated themselves to teaching left the country. And on the ship Covadonga, 135 priests and the assistant bishop of Havana were forced to leave the country, and the parents lost the right to raise their children according to the convictions of their own faith, because from that moment on, all teaching was organized by the state with its own ideology. During those years, many people began to fear going to church, express their faith, and baptize their children. So many people felt this fear, and there was a silence about God that spread in the public space. And when people brought up the matter, it was done in hushed voices or making signs. For many decades, when people went to church, they would look over their shoulders and make sure no one would see them, and then they would go through a small door into the church. It was a real faith. The church was ridiculed. If you were a believer, you were de facto against the revolution. Some college majors were prohibited for those who profess religious beliefs, and others, such as Jehovah's Witnesses, suffered even greater persecution. Christian communities were impoverished in a matter of a few months and were not able to attend adequately to the faithful. Church buildings began to deteriorate, and all access to the and the church lost all access to social means of communication. Priests and nuns had to change their lives and their mission in this unprecedented situation that nobody was prepared for. There was an exhaustive exposition of all the elements that helped to understand the recent and more distant past of Cuba and also its present. And I should mention that the church, after that strong initial conflict with the church, entered a phase of silence. It was necessary to protect it from external hostility and to protect the weak, the flock which had become weak and wounded. The church continued, however, to serve the Cuban people within its abilities. We owe a lot to the secular people, and my parents gave testimony of their faith in non-ecclesiastical areas. Our bishops and priests and religious and nuns also gave testimony of their simple and poor life. In Cuba, during those difficult years, the church continued to carry out its services in church buildings and to share the gospel from person to person, literally on an individual basis. And that way, we learned the strength of the little of seedlings, and we began to work as a new statistic, as the mustard seed with genuine gospel flavor. And I'm convinced that when Pope John Paul II became the Pope, who came from communist Poland, he helped the Catholic Church in Cuba to reinvent itself and to rediscover, so to speak, that it is necessary to announce the good news of salvation no matter the circumstances. And so with quite a bit of suffering and in a very progressive and humble way, the realities of service were organized. The pastoral campaign for health in 1987, and then in 1991, the church structures caritas, or charitable services, in each diocese and in many parishes. Dioceses and parish-based libraries were created so that the faithful and the public in general could access the Bible and religious and humanist literature. Informational centers were opened for both believers and non-believers, were created, as well as kindergartens. The work of missionaries, especially the religious work of the nuns, was carried out at retirement homes and with the ill and with the poor, and this was something that was increasingly recognized and acknowledged among the Cuban people. And since 1989, there has been discreet yet efficient pastoral presence in jails and prisons. And the last three popes have visited Cuba, and Pope Francis, when he came to the airport in Havana. The last three popes have visited Cuba, and they have been able to have respectful meetings with government authorities and representatives of different areas of the national culture. During the hardest phases for the church in Cuba and its relationship with the government, there was only contact and some conversations with the apostolic authorities. And today, with regard to the church and the Cuban people, it mainly happens with the Catholic bishops in the country. For the last many years, Permissions are typically granted to processions such as the Virgin Mary festivities or other and various saints. At Christmas time and during Holy Week, and the Virgin of Charity, which is the patron saint of Cuba, there's some space on national TV that the Catholic Church can use to address its faithful and anyone who would like to listen. The Council of Churches of Cuba also participates on television during the major Christian holidays. In fact, the Council of Churches, which basically covers the evangelical churches, has a Sunday program, has had a radio Sunday program for the last 30 years, and starting with the recent COVID-19 pandemic, the Catholic Church was given the opportunity to participate in that. And every Sunday, each Catholic bishop now has a half-hour radio program in the various provinces where their respective parishes are located. The Council of Churches, together with the United Biblical Societies, successfully had a program titled A Million Bibles for Cuba, which all the Christian communities located on the island were able to enjoy. And last Tuesday, the Biblical Cuban Society was established in Havana, which will include different countries as members of the Brotherhood of Biblical Societies, which includes 153 Bible societies around the world. And I learned, because I was appointed to be a member of that group, more than 40 million biblical material have been included, including Braille writing and other languages, so which were much more advanced than so many other places. And I'm going to conclude, and I'll skip a few paragraphs to conclude. I sincerely believe that the current situation of the Church and the exercise of faith is different from past decades. At the same time, additional steps are necessary to improve the exercise of religion for the good of citizens who have religious beliefs and for the common good, because history shows that the reservoir humanism and ethics that characterize the healthy exercise of religion by humans make a significant contribution to the full progress of the whole nation and to the peaceful coexistence of states. And religious freedom is part of freedom in general and the free exercise of human rights. And we Christians believe that being a human is being in the image and likeness of the Creator, and that this is a dignity without equal which must be respected and promoted. This is the basis for the way that the Church defends life from pregnancy and until natural death. The Church has no political purpose, nor is that its mission in the world, but rather to serve men, which is what Christ asks of those who are His. And this, of course, means that we are committed to human beings and the dignity of humans, which should not be regarded with suspicion by governments or other instances or by civil organizations. And respecting this contribution, which comes from the specific character of the Church, should not be an issue nor a source of conflict in a pluralistic society within a secular state. I would like to think that just like so many other things have been achieved that in the past seemed impossible, we can and must continue to reach greater goals. That way, all Cubans will win, and we will also be able to obtain hope. Thank you very much.
Bom dia. E, em primeiro lugar, And first of all, I will be speaking in my mother tongue, Portuguese. I will speak slowly so that the interpreters will not have problems. And I would like to thank immensely the invitation that was made to me. I did not deserve to be here, and I don't have the capacity to be here, but it was God that brought me here. And God acted through the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that brought me here. And I am convinced of that. And I will be reading so I won't get lost, because when I get to Brazil, certainly my bishop will ask me what I said here, and I will have documents to deliver to him. And I will be speaking as a father, even though I have background in law, but I will be speaking as a father, and I am here as a father, Catholic father. He that does not love does not know God, because God is love. 1 John 4, verses 7 through 8. Many believe that in order to know God, it is only necessary and it is enough to formally adhere to a religious creed through the practice of a cult, following dogmas or doctrines, knowing the sacred books, knowing well the sacred books. And all of this, without a doubt, has its due and proportional importance. However, knowing God, a superior being, the Holy One, the Creator, must take place first and foremost in a communion of love. This indeed is the great beginning of drawing closer to God. Therefore, anyone who does not love or does not allow themselves to love, even if they have an absolutely fervent faith and strictly follow all the rules of religion, will not be able to firmly and truly be focused in God. It is interesting to note, for example, that the religious intolerant in general knows texts by heart, the sacred texts, recites theological terms with ease, shouts quotes, but does not act with love. Let us remember that Jesus was on his journey with people like that, and with sadness. We are forced to recognize that fanaticism, religious fanaticism, is also carried out by religious people, with no exclusion to Christians. The radical acts with hatred, with resentment, with a feeling of revenge, with a desire for elimination. He is led to consider himself omnipotent and forgets that we are all brothers and sisters. Accepting the other as they are, for he that is intolerant becomes an impossible, arduous mission. As they look at the other only through their dogmatic prism and not with love. Religion, in this sense, imprisons, reduces, and becomes the enemy of a spiritual life. Pope Francis clearly stated in his encyclical letter Fratelli Tutti, All Brethren, written with the help of the great Imam Al-Tayyib, that whoever builds walls around himself will inevitably end up a prisoner within those walls. They will not have the vision of others, and they will never look at the world from different and varied perspectives, but they will only look at the wall. They will never appreciate the richness and beauty of the seeds of a fraternal life experienced with others. Science swells, but love builds. This is in the first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 8, verses 1 through 3. Knowledge is not bad in itself. Knowing your own faith in itself is not a bad thing. This is something, for example, that Article 18 of the Declaration did not address. The right to study and know one's own faith. Studying your own faith is, without a shadow of a doubt, healthy, it is noble, and it's even necessary. We need to know and know how I am different in my faith in relation to others. Otherwise, this would be a false freedom of religion. In short, I then need to know myself, and I need to know what I believe in order to establish a dialogue. Otherwise, it will be a monologue and not a dialogue. And here I explain what I previously mentioned, the word radical, which in itself is also not bad. It comes from root, foundation, basis, support, column. Being radical in this sense is not bad. It's not evil. It is actually about demonstrating conviction, and certainly in what you believe, and by living through that. A tree without its root could be anything but a tree. The extreme meaning of the word radical is bad. This is evil. Radicalism. What is it? I discover by my own strengths and not by the Spirit of God that the fundament is with me alone and never with another person. In other words, I become the owner of truth, the absolute center of truth. Pilate acted like that. His question to Jesus was, quid est veritas? What is truth? Pilate unfortunately did not understand that truth goes hand in hand with love. This is a pity for him. And so, when we are not accompanied by love, it will not result in a deep knowledge of God, but instead, it will result in pride, in self-absorption, a lack of interest for your neighbor, and you will become indifferent. Perversion of those that are convinced is therefore radicalism. Pride is the mortar of the wall I mentioned a little earlier. The fact of the matter is that no one can feel faithful to their faith, fulfilling everything it demands, but judging themselves for this with more dignity than others. My religion is the best and it is superior. If anyone loves God, he or she is known of him. 1 Corinthians 8:3. I have to learn. God is God, and he manifests himself as he wishes, where he wishes, and with whomever he wishes. We do not want to place ties on the Almighty Lord. This is not going to work. God does not need approval from men to act in this world. In this sense, we must not accept that religion is above any other. Pope Francis has already stated, God is not the God of Catholics, but he is God. If anyone says, I love God and hates his brother, he's a liar. For whoever does not love his brother whom he has seen, how can he love God whom he has not seen? And we have from him this commandment, that whoever loves God must also love his brother. 1 John 4, verses 20-21. No one can say, I love God, but hate his brother. Any religious person who says or does this is not religious, but a hypocrite. If we can summarize the entire life of the Christ, here is its synthesis. Love for God necessarily goes through love for others. I am sorry to state the obvious, but even what is obvious is being forgotten. I have a question. What is necessary both to know and to be known by God? The answer is love for one another. If we live radically like that, and I emphasize the word radical again, either Christians or not, believers or non-believers, men and women of goodwill, I am sure we would not even know what the word intolerance or discrimination would be. Let's renounce pettiness, resentment, endless contradictions. Let's stop that. Let's assume our own limitations. Instead of increasing hatred and grudges, let us feed on what is good, and everyone and all religions without exception will put ourselves in the service of good. I hope on behalf of the Archdiocese of Rio de Janeiro and of my Cardinal, Orani João Tempesta, who delegated me to be here with you today, that this annual international symposium and the conference, the International Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, will stimulate reflection, will bring religions together, promote dialogue, because something here is already being achieved, as Pope Francis says, a culture of encounter. Thank you.
¿Me oye? Buenos días a
Bom dia a todos vocês. É prazer estar com vocês.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm grateful to the organizers and the Brigham University for the invitation. I'm grateful to all those who are here and who are listening to us at this time. My name is Marcos Peckel, and I'm the director of the Jewish Community of Colombia. I'm also a member of the Executive Committee of the Worldwide Jewish Community. And my perspective for this discussion begins from the Jewish side, and since I'm a Colombian, also from the country that I represent at this event. There's much talk about persecution and deterioration of religious freedom in the world, but the numbers don't lie. In the various countries, in the various ways, whether it's through the authoritarian governments or through religious nationalism, and we know all that. The question is what to do about it. But there's not much time, so I'm going to start at the end of the presentation, and then I'll analyze what I'm saying. It's not only religious freedom, but it is the place of religion in society. Because we need to understand that civilization was created by religion. And the organized society came up with different beliefs and identities and a conduct within society against the neighbor and to God. And that's what we need to, that what separates religious freedom, it's a defensive act. It's a defensive act at times when religions are under permanent attack. Therefore, one topic for the religious organizations is to have a high visibility of participation in the country.
El más alto perfil, la más alta visibilidad, participar en todos los debates sociales.
Participating in all the social debates and not being ashamed of the topic that we represent.
Algo que fue primero.
And that we represent something that came before everything else, before all the new things that are appearing and that are trying to marginalize religious communities. We have to interact with all sectors of society, friends and enemies, those who think that we are, to paraphrase Karl Marx, the opium of the people, those who love us and those who hate us. We have to enter into dialogue with all of them. We don't need to convince anyone or let them convince us unless we think that we're wrong. We need to carry out social work, which we're already doing. We can reach those that the government cannot reach, especially in Latin America where governments are fragile. And the Jewish community, which I'm proud to represent during the pandemic, we were able to reach places and communities. Colombia is an area where there are various indigenous communities and where the state has never really reached out. And that was where, through social action, we were able to reach out. And I would have to say that our brothers and sisters from the Church of Jesus Christ were also able to reach out through social work during the pandemic and subsequently as well. This is no coincidence, because charity is something we see. It's something that we do as a religious organization. It's something that we need to do because it is part of our vision. And that's why we do it. We must accept, and here the key word is, the word is perhaps appropriate or inappropriate, but the sins that religious organizations have committed in the past, whether it's through persecution or forcing people to convert, whether it's by killing.
Al final del día somos seres humanos.
And at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and we too make mistakes.
Ajenas a los errores.
Religions are not
Por eso no los
exempt from mistakes.
con más vehemencia por lo que somos.
And
Cuando hay que aceptarlo, los aceptamos. Cuando
when we accept them, and when we ask for forgiveness, we do so. When we need to repair something, we repair it. Religions are not monoliths, but thanks to the promulgation in 1965, at the end of the Second Vatican Council, a new general interfaith dialogue opened not only with the Catholic Church, and we started to work with the various countries in Latin America, which are predominantly Catholic and evangelical, various interfaith groups with whom we were able to engage in dialogue for the good of society.
tenemos que hacer actividad política.
We need to engage on the political level. Nobody can prohibit us from doing so, but we also need to be careful.
Para no ponernos en posiciones
So that we don't end up in a position where religious faiths are considered to be opposed to progress or the new social agenda as the enemies of society because of the positions that they have.
la actividad política que nosotros tenemos.
The political activity that we need to engage in is something that we need to do very wisely.
Nosotros podemos en nuestra intimidad, voy a decir algo que acá.
I'm going to say something that might sound a little strong here,
Doctrinariamente
but our religions are doctrinally opposed to abortion and have all the right to be so. But I ask myself, without
es lo correcto o no.
placing this in a society is correct or not? Well, and I won't answer that, but each of you can answer that in your own space. At times when
Religiones,
religions,
principalmente el cristianismo, queridos amigos,
and primarily Christianity, and most of my friends here profess the Christian faith, it's the most persecuted religion nowadays in the world.
tenemos que trabajar juntos.
We must work together
El antisemitismo
because, as I say, this anti-Semitism is growing in proportions that we had not seen in a long time, perhaps not since the ovens were turned off at the end of World War II.
vemos expresiones de antisemitismo no
We see expressions of anti-Semitism not only verbally, but here in this country. In Pittsburgh, in a synagogue a couple of years ago, this man came in to kill the faithful because they were Jews.
en California.
And then in California,
Vemos
it happened again. We see that many colleges and universities in this country, in the United States, are hostile toward Judaism. I know Jewish students who have felt
algunas de Ivy League,
this hostile environment against them, including at Ivy League universities, and some people have actually dropped out and have gone to places where they did not have to feel that. Many went to Israel.
¿Cómo combatimos nosotros
How do we
esa
fight this
y tengo que decir también
phobia of religions? And I should also include the Islamophobia that we've seen in some countries. We've seen attacks against mosques in Western countries, a rebirth of these ideologies that we thought had been buried by history. Yet they have resurfaced.
enemigos, sus víctimas,
And their enemies, their victims,
personas de fe.
are people of faith.
Creo que conmemorando
I believe that as we commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Declaration of the Rights of Man, among others, written by a Jewish lawyer, the Frenchman René Cassim, like it says, humankind begins to become part of the international system, not only feeling love for states and organizations, but for the human being. In Article 18, which guarantees the right of people to the freedom of worship, this is one of the most violated articles in many countries. So perhaps an event like this one will allow us to come forth with tools and concrete actions on how to defend Article 18
no respetan
against countries that clearly do not respect the freedom of worship, and where blasphemy is still codified as a crime, as a criminal offense,
en su propio Dios y en algunos casos
and where believing one's own God, in some cases, is still punishable by death.
y hoy en día
The world is not easy, and nowadays it is even less easy because there is a deterioration of democracy, of institutions, of international organizations, beginning with the United Nations, the very same organization that promulgated the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, yet it is failing to enforce it.
podríamos decir que el ser humano siempre
We could say that humans will always be humans, but I don't think that's the case. I think that those of us who are here, the entire society and the entire societies which we represent, must do everything necessary to defend religious freedom, not everywhere, not only in our country or in our regions, but the rights of everyone everywhere, because we Jews know that where there is anti-Semitism, there is all kinds of discrimination, and that anti-Semitism may begin with the Jews, but does not end there.
nuestra labor diaria.
And this is something we see daily in a line. We need to form alliances with people who perhaps do not think the same as we do and who may not even be religious, but who consider the freedom of worship, the freedom of conscience, the freedom to believe, the freedom of faith to be an essential value in society for the improvement of society. Thank you very much. Shalom.